probably. Hey everyone, I'm Josh.
And I'm Kelly.
And this is Uprooted Faith, a weekly discussion on a variety of topics related to religion, Christianity, the news, food, whatever we feel like talking about. So thank you for watching us. I am tongue-tied as well. If you're watching us live on Facebook, welcome. Put something in the chat so we know we're watching you. If you're watching us after the fact, either through the recording on Facebook or on YouTube, thanks for watching us there as well. Put a comment as well if you're watching us after we went live.
Yeah, and I've got it up so we
confirm that's working as well.
Check comments on Facebook Live. So
that's awesome.
Join in the comments and the conversation.
Yes. Before we get started, a little bit of warning. There'll be a lot of Bible verses we're going to cover tonight. So you may want to be in your best interest maybe to like stretch your fingers, get ready to move to change pages, or maybe find a Bible, or if you don't have one handy, you can just write them down and look them up afterwards.
Yeah.
If we had higher production value, I could have had the verses pop up on the screen, but hey, that's where we are right now, so we'll do it old school.
It is what it is.
Yes. So if you recall last week, we unpacked Paul and why he seems to be a controversial character, where his origin story of converting to Christianity is one of my favorites. But then if you read some of his letters and maybe pick verses apart and take them out of context, he seems to be, against women, against homosexuals, against a lot of groups and things.
He is not.
But he's not.
And
so
I'm here to tell you that.
You'll help us debunk. So tonight we will focus strictly on what did Paul really mean when he was talking about women. And we have a lot of verses to unpack tonight. Do you want to give some background before we get started?
I think it's really important that we remember that Paul wasn't writing letters to us. So Paul was writing to specific church groups about specific issues within their group. Because everybody's trying to figure out what it meant to follow Jesus. And so a lot of times churches would write to Paul, and we don't have any of those letters. None of those letters survived. But we know that Paul was often referencing one of their letters just by what he says in the letter that he writes to them. They weren't considered holy scripture then. It wasn't until much later that they became canonized or part of the what we call the Bible today. And when his letters were recopied, so somebody would bring a letter to the church and in a certain town, and they would pass it around from house church to house church, and then they would be recopied so that more people could read them. They would read them during church, what we would call church. But then when they were recopied later, some thoughts may have been jotted in the margins. And then the next person who copied them thought, oh, that needs to go in here. They just, when they recopied it, they forgot to write that sentence and they just wrote it over here. So that needs to go in.
So the original notes in the margins were more of the person copying their commentary?
Well, we don't know.
Okay.
We don't know for sure, but that's one speculation, is that someone copying it could have just added their own thoughts. As time goes on, after Paul is dead and gone, and they're still passing these letters around and they're recopying them, there may have been certain people who added things because they felt like, oh, this needs to be added here. This needs to be clarified. But they weren't necessarily echoing Paul.
Okay.
And so that's why we get contradictions in Paul's letters. There's some, argument that all the letters attributed to Paul were not written by Paul. Now, there are arguments on both sides, but there are definitely things within his letters that contradict each other.
Yeah.
And so you have to look at the overall message that he had, and then you take these individual verses and you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense with everything else he said. Sure. So that's why we think, maybe somebody else wrote that in there.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
So
also another interesting fact of
Yeah.
the time was how the people of that time, what men thought of women. Men thought that women were just deformed males.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know who started that theory or
No,
that rumor?
no, but it was just like a common thing. So, and that also fed into the Gnostics. They also, adopted that idea that, in order for a woman to be able to get to heaven, they had to become a man.
Really?
Yeah,
I had not heard that
that's
before.
that's part of the Gnostic belief, and so I think it's the Book of Thomas, one of the Gnostic Gospels.
Okay.
I think it's in there. So that's part of the reason why the Gnostic Gospels didn't make the cut, and they're not hidden. I have a book of all of them.
Yeah.
You can go on Amazon and get a book of the Gnostic Gospels and read them. But when you read them, you're like, oh, I see why that didn't make it in there. That sounds nothing like Jesus. So, yeah,
Well, interesting.
women were not esteemed,
Sure.
and
So
they were supposed to be submissive to their husband. That was just the way of the world.
that was the culture.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, we'll go. So I think we'll step through some of the letters of Paul, starting with Romans, and working our way back into the New Testament. And we're not going to go in order. I mean, some of these are, he's praising women. Others, you could read this out of context and like, wait a minute, what did Paul put here? And like you said, it may not have been written by Paul. So let's just dive right in, and we'll start with Romans chapter 16. And there's a couple verses in there that we could unpack that are worth noting. And maybe I'll read them out, and you can help explain
Okay.
the significance. So the first one is Romans 16, verse 3. So in this chapter, he's doing greetings to some of the Roman Christians, right? And he starts with verse 3 saying, say hello to, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Prisca, okay.
Or
and,
Priscilla.
And Priscilla and Aquila, my co-workers in Jesus Christ, who risked their own necks for my life. So help me understand why that is significant.
So that's significant because in that time, nobody would ever refer to the woman first, the wife first.
So Priscilla or Prisca is the woman, and Aquila
wife.
is
Yes.
the husband. Is that
yes.
okay?
And so it was like, it just wasn't done. And the senior person was always greeted first. It was a strict protocol of those times. So nobody did that, but Paul did.
Interesting. So what else do we know about Priscilla? Was she... Besides,
she and her husband, they were friends with Paul, and
Okay.
I think he spent time with them. And,
yeah.
Yeah.
I should note this too. I read these verses in my head, and typically in the past, when I've been a liturgist, I read them out loud to make sure I could pronounce the things right.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't prepare properly, so I'm going to pronounce some of these names wrong. So the next one is Romans 16, verse 7. It also says, say hello to Adronicus and Junia, my relatives and my fellow prisoners. They were prominent among the apostles, and they were in Christ before me. Mm-hmm. So how is that significant?
So Junia is a woman,
Okay.
and to be called outstanding among the apostles was a big deal. Now, nobody ever argued that Junia was a woman until maybe the 13th century, when somebody decided, well, it couldn't have been a woman. There couldn't be a woman that was an apostle.
Well,
only men were apostles.
Does the background, is there anything in here that refers to her as a woman?
That's just a woman's name.
Okay.
So
Fair enough. Okay.
when they translated, they said, well, that must be wrong. Let's put an S on the end of it. Now it becomes a male name.
Paul must have meant Junius, not Junia.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
So
That's interesting.
But there's no other, before the 13th century, everybody just knew it was a female. And,
Sure.
And, men who, wrote commentaries and everything about Scripture acknowledged her as a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And Junia became a male because men couldn't accept that a woman could be an apostle.
That's interesting.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay. So we start with Romans 16. It seems like Paul at least is giving respect to women, properly putting them in front of their husband if they do have more prominence, or calling them out if they've just been being good as a Christ follower, right?
Yeah. Now here's something else that's interesting about Priscilla. In Romans 16:19, he says their house. Their house. Now, that was a big deal because women didn't get acknowledged as owning properties. So the fact that it's their house is a big deal. And also in Acts 18:26, there's a story about Priscilla and Aquila that they met Apollos, who came after Paul had left the area and began teaching. And they didn't think he was, quite right on some of the things he was saying. So it says they took him and expounded to him the way of God more accurately. So see, that contradicts the 1 Timothy 2:12 rule about no woman can teach a man or have authority over a man.
We'll get to that in a little bit to try to unpack that one more. But that's
I
interesting.
just think that's really important
about
to point that out about Priscilla.
That she taught. Okay. She taught a man. Oh man, how dare her that she.
Yeah.
How dare she. Okay. The next one, we're going to go to Corinthians, and there's a bunch of verses in 1 Corinthians that unpacked. The first one is 1 Corinthians chapter 7, and you can read through 1 through 5. I just picked out verse 2 and verse 4, just to not have to bore you with my reading the 5 verses, but it says, each man should have his own wife, and each woman should have her own husband because of sexual immorality. The wife doesn't have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband doesn't have authority over his own body, but the wife does. So this seems to suggest that both are equal as far as having authority over each other's bodies, right? There's not one that's dominant over the other, is what it is, right?
Yes. That is, that's pretty plain.
Okay, nothing else to say there?
That's what Paul thought, he treated men and women as equals.
Getting some pretty easy verses to start with. I guess we're starting easy, and we'll get to the more complex ones. Next one in 1 Corinthians is 1 Corinthians. Oh, this one will be interesting. Yes, 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 3 through 10. Now, I think this entire section is worth reading, and maybe you can stop me at certain points to try to explain some of the stuff here. So I'll start with verse 3 in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Now, I want you to know that the head of every man is Christ, and the head of the woman is the man, and the head of Christ is God. Every man who prays or prophesies with his head covered shames his head. Every woman who prays or prophesies with her head uncovered disgraces her head. It is the same thing as having her head shaved.
Okay, let's just stop right there.
Yeah, let's do that.
Let's just stop
set
right
it straight.
there.
So women shouldn't shave their head is what it's saying, right?
So, first of all, there's this idea, especially among evangelical Christians, that there's this hierarchy. That there's Christ, and then there's the man, and then there's the woman, and then there's the children. And there's this umbrella. And I think it's interesting here that he says, he's not doing a right hierarchy here. He's not putting people in the right order. So man, Christ, woman, God, that's not a hierarchy.
Okay.
So there's two things about verse 5. Every woman who prays or prophesies. Okay, so now we are assuming that it's okay for them to do that.
Fair point. Yeah.
Right?
There you
go. With her head uncovered, dishonors her head. So the thing is that it was a societal thing that women, when they left the house, they put their hair up. Because women who had their hair down were giving a signal that they were available. So so what was happening was, there are these house churches, and so the woman didn't necessarily have her hair up, and she's praying and prophesying, and and if people saw that, they would equate that with immorality, and then it would make the Christians look even worse than they already looked.
Okay.
So yeah, there's that. There's two things in there. Yeah.
Okay.
So
and that says, let's see.
I would go down to 8.
8. Okay. The next one is man didn't have his origin from woman, but woman from man. And man wasn't created for the sake of the woman, but the woman for the sake of the man. Because of this, a woman should have authority over her head because of the angels. See how we go? So, however, a woman is independent from man, and man is independent from woman in the Lord. I could go on and just go back and forth. Oh, sorry, he's not. Yes, yeah. I'm sorry.
So, woman is not independent of man, nor is man independent of woman. For as woman came from man, the whole rib thing.
Yeah.
So also man is born of woman. So
there's a lot of back and forth here. I got to read it more to unpack.
Yeah, but I think his point is, nobody is better than anybody else. Men aren't better than women, because if it weren't for a woman, you wouldn't be here. So that I just think this passage affirms Paul's assumption that both men and women are equal, and both men and women participate in leading worship. Yeah.
Okay. The verse we jumped over, I was going to ask you about too. Mm-hmm. In, what is it? 6, it says, if it is disgraceful for a woman to have short hair to be shaved, then she should keep her head covered. Is that going back then to just to not, I guess, go against society when you're trying to,
well, I think
act
he's
as
just,
a Christian?
I think he's just making a point here. If a woman does not cover her head, which is what was appropriate, mm-hmm. then she should have her hair cut off. And if it is a disgrace for a woman to have her hair cut or shaved off, she should cover her head.
Okay.
So
well, you like that, it makes more sense, right?
Yeah, he's just kind of like, just put your hair up, because we don't want people making wrong assumptions about Christians.
Okay. So let's stay with 1 Corinthians, go to chapter 14, and this is going to be verse 34 through 35. And it says, and I'm going to go a little bit before 34, but like in all the churches of God's people, the women should be quiet during the meeting. They are not allowed to talk. Instead, they need to get under control, just as the law says. If they want to learn something, they should ask their husbands at home. It is disgraceful for a woman to talk during the meeting. So this verse, I'm pretty sure my wife, this is one of the ones she's like, I'm done with Paul.
Okay.
So set us straight on this one.
There are two ways to look at this. This is probably a direct quote from the letter he received from them.
They're saying this to him.
Yeah, the letter probably said, women should remain silent in the churches. They are not allowed to speak, but must be in submission, as the law says. And if they want to inquire about something, they should ask their own husbands at home. All this is probably a quotation, that Paul is pulling out of that letter. Now he's going to address it, and he's going to say, did the word of God originate with you? Are you the only people that it has reached? In other words, it's not up to you to decide who gets to speak in church. So the other possibility, if it's not a direct quote from a letter, is that, like I said earlier, it was something that somebody added later.
Okay.
Like, oh, well, I think women need to remain silent because that's the law, and it sounds like 1 Timothy 2, 11 and 12, and we already kind of touched on that.
We'll touch on it a little bit, yeah.
But it sounds like that. So again, it may be something that somebody just wrote in. It also reflects the culture of the time, the Greco-Roman world, and Jewish traditions. But there's a counterpoint to that, and that's in Ephesians 5, which we'll get to.
That's a good segue to the next one, so we can jump to that one now. So we'll get into Ephesians, and like you said, Ephesians chapter 5, verse 22 through 24. I got to find it because I had it before. Oh, and I'm actually going to start with verse 20. I'm going to go back. So always give thanks to God the Father for everything in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, and submit to each other out of respect for Christ. For example, wives should submit to their husbands as if to the Lord. A husband is the head of his wife, like Christ is head of the church, that is, the Savior of the body. So wives submit to their husbands in everything like the church submits to Christ. So I'm going to stop there because you can take that out of context and read that. You're like, well, that describes male headship, right?
And let's look at your version here. And
Sure.
the heading is be filled with the Spirit, and it begins with which verse?
15.
I can't. Okay.
15.
So in this NIV version, it says wives and husbands, and it starts with verse 22.
Okay.
So, but there weren't headings in the original writings.
And yours is NIV, and I'd say mine is the Common English Bible, is the translation I'm using.
So what happens is people take out verse 21, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. But that should go with the next verses because it's all about submitting to each other. And so, and if you just take wives submit to your husbands as to the Lord, if you just take that out, you're missing the whole point.
Yeah.
You can't just take out a verse and decide that's what I'm going to use to prove my point, because you have ignored what Paul was getting at. Because if you keep going on, then you'll see that he's talking about a couple different things here. Do you want to read from 25?
Yeah, I can do that. So that's what I find that it's interesting because you can take this out of context, but I feel like you can't say, like we said before, John 3:16, you can't just do John 3:16, you got to add 17. Ephesians 5:22 through 24, you can't say that without including 25 through 27. So I'll start with 25 then. After it says, wives submit to your husbands, and it says, as for husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her. He did this to make her holy by washing her in a bath of water with the word. He did this to present himself with a splendid church, one without any sort of stain or wrinkle on her clothes.
Okay, so right there, he's talking about the church and Christ. So husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Because in that time, the church was referred to in the feminine because there's also the use of the bride of Christ.
Okay.
The bride of Christ is the church. So
I'm surprised the folks in the 13th century didn't change that to a masculine pronoun, like with the previous one.
Well, they would have had to change a lot. Okay. They would have had to change a lot because the bride of Christ is like really prominent. So especially in Revelation.
That's sure. Yep.
Yeah. So in 28, in the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated his own body, but he feeds and cares for it. Now, see, this goes back to what I was saying about this idea that women were considered deformed males.
Okay.
And so he's saying here, just as you love your body and you take care of it, that's the same care and respect you are to give to your wife. So no, she is not deformed or less than. So I love this passage because he is making it clear, but people have cherry picked this and used it as a weapon against women. Yeah. When actually, Paul would be rolling over in his grave to know that it had been used this way. There's the Galatians 3, there is no more male or female, no slave or free, all these, no Jew or Gentile. I mean, you can't say that and then say, women, you're underneath men, you're not as good as men. It just doesn't jive. So you have to take this whole passage and read it as one message is husbands and wives are supposed to respect and be subject to each other. It's a partnership. It's an equal partnership. And two, this is the way Christ loves the church. All the followers of Jesus. Christ loves the church in this way of, making her beautiful for God. And so there's two different messages there, and they're both really positive.
Okay. That's interesting. Well, the last verse we'll go to is another controversial verse. We've mentioned a couple times is 1 Timothy 2. So in 1 Timothy chapter 2, we'll start with verse 11, and I'll just read through 15. So it goes, "A wife should learn quietly with complete submission. I don't allow a wife to teach or control her husband. Instead, she should be a quiet listener. Adam was formed first, and then Eve. Adam wasn't deceived, but rather his wife became the one who stepped over the line because she was completely deceived. But a wife will be brought safely through giving birth to their children, if they can both continue in faith, love, and holiness together with self-control." So that last verse ends, but if you pick the first, 11 through 14, you're like, okay, that's another submission chapter.
But
set
then
of verses.
verse 15, women will be saved through childbearing. That's that Gnostic, going back to that Gnostic gospel of, I mean, everywhere else Paul said you are saved by grace alone. Mm-hmm. There's nothing you can do to earn your salvation. So this, and the Gnostics believed that you had to keep attaining more and more knowledge until eventually, you know everything, and then, you are, I don't know. Anyway, this whole idea of you have to earn your salvation, like women have to earn their salvation by having children, that's ridiculous. That's not something that Paul would say. In this whole thing, I do not permit a woman to teach or have authority over a man, really, but it was okay for Priscilla to do that,
So it seems out of context with what Paul has written previously, right?
Unless I do not permit. See, that just sounds to me like somebody wrote that in the margin. I do not permit women to teach men at my church, and she must be silent. That's not Paul, because Paul just, we were just reading about Paul saying when a woman speaks in church, her hair should be up.
Yeah.
And then, and Adam was not the one deceived. It was the woman who was deceived. Nope, that's not what Paul said. He said that Adam was deceived, that Adam was the cause of the fall, not the woman. So see, none of that makes sense with everything else he said.
Which is good. The problem is, if people don't have this conversation, and it seems like in order to fully understand Paul, you need to read all his letters to get a good feeling for overall what was his message. And then you can start to pick out, this doesn't seem like what Paul is. The problem is people don't do that, and people just pick stuff out and say, hey, this clump of verses suggests that, women should submit their husbands and male headship should be how we run the church, right?
Well, and I think that, people who, you can find whatever you want to find in the Bible.
Yeah.
And patriarchy was not the way it was supposed to be. It's not the way Jesus ran things. He had female disciples. And this was really radical, though. This whole idea of men and women being equal, that was very radical. But Paul was committed to that idea. And none of Paul's writings contradict that principle, but they confirm it. And there's plenty of evidence that Paul did uphold that commitment. in his, not just his words, but also in his practice. All the women, so many women in his letters that he names as co-workers and helpers and deacons, and and then deacon got translated as deaconess, because then men could say, oh, well, that's not really that's not a deacon, that's a deaconess. It's like they're the auxiliary. Like these groups that are, a club or whatever, that you have to be a man, like the Gideons, you have to be a man to join the Gideons.
Or the Little Rascals, right? The Little Rascals.
Well, yes.
Female Women Haters Club or whatever. No, Superman or whatever it was. Yeah.
But then there's an auxiliary that you can be as a woman, and that just,
That's
and I
interesting.
also think it's interesting that a lot of evangelicals, are always like, we can't conform to the culture of today. We can't, we can't be like everybody else. But then they want to just throw Paul's words out the window.
Yeah.
And conform to what everybody is, that's the way it's been ever since, I don't know when, but, patriarchy has been the thing.
Yeah.
And Paul was against that, and Jesus was against that. And that's not the way it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be radical. The early church was supposed to be radical, and that was one of the ways it was radical, because Paul was upsetting the household codes of the Greco-Roman world. And, we're supposed to stand out from the culture, not try to fit in. And if you ignore what Paul says here, then you're just trying to fit in with the culture of patriarchy.
Yeah, it's struggle. And I think there's some churches, though, that I've read that I've, practiced that male headship. And the thought is, each family household gets one vote, and it's really the man that decides how to vote, right?
Right. That's Pete Hegseth's pastor.
Yes. Well, there's other pastors. Yes.
I watched an interview with him. I don't know about who else.
Maybe it is. Maybe it's the same one. Maybe it's one of the same.
I watched someone interview Pete Hegseth's pastor, and that's what he said. That it's only the man of the house that can vote.
Because it clearly says in 1 Timothy whatever, women submit to your husbands, right?
Yeah.
You shouldn't be teaching men. They should be teaching you.
And he also said that there should only be Christian churches in this country. There should be no other religions. You can have a different religion, you just can't practice it in public.
Okay.
Was something else that he said. I was really shocked, but I saw the words coming out of his mouth. It's not somebody said that he said. I watched the interview and was just kind of shocked. But, gender discrimination, racial discrimination, that is against what Paul said.
Yeah.
And, and if we're going to discriminate against women, then, not we, if people are going to discriminate against women, then they're going to discriminate against people of color.
Yeah. It's a good point.
Because it's all in that, that Ephesians or Galatians 3, there is no longer male nor female, slave nor free, Jew nor Gentile, all are one in Jesus Christ. And Jesus prayed that in John 17, that we would all be one.
Sure. Well, good stuff.
And that was Paul's message too.
So there we go. I think we debunked that Paul was not against women, but I guess, if there are any other verses you've heard about that have used to maybe put down women or put them as submissive, let us know. I think the way to continue to learn is, have this conversation. If there's a verse that comes out, maybe the thing is, what's the context behind that verse? Read more than just the verse. Read the chapter. Maybe read the whole letter or something, right? To understand. And then also, did Paul really mean this? Does this fit his motif of, neither male nor female? Everybody's the same in Jesus Christ.
That's one of the things that people who don't want to go to church or they don't want to have anything to do with Christianity, that's one of the things they say is, well, the Bible's full of contradictions. Well,
yeah.
Yes and no. Yes, sometimes it seems like there are contradictions. And we have to remember that the Bible didn't like just fall out of heaven, as this book. It was written by a lot of different people in a lot of different times and a lot of different cultures, and we have to take it all together.
Yeah.
Now, if this topic really interests you, then I have 2 books to recommend.
Okay.
Because that's what I do. And one is called Jesus Feminist by Sarah Bessey.
Okay.
Jesus Feminist. And the other one is The Making of Biblical Womanhood by Beth Allison Barr. The Making of Biblical Womanhood. That one is very interesting. She comes at it from a historical view. Sarah Bessey comes, I think, more like from a theological viewpoint, but also she has a lot of history as well. So both excellent books.
Okay. We can put them in. Maybe we can put them in the on the chat or post them on there. Well, interesting. Well, if you found this interesting, next week we're going to go even more controversial. Probably the most heated discussion is, what did Paul mean about homosexuality, right? And those are the verses I think get a lot more. I mean, not a lot more, but they're the ones that are more maybe vocal and people that are anti-LGBTQIA, right? Using these verses. So we'll unpack those next week and try to debunk, what did Paul really mean when he was talking about homosexuality? So until then, thank you for watching us, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.